Yeah, so I'm a developer at DataMade. We're a small civic tech consulting / web development / data viz shop in Chicago, and we do a lot of open source development. And I guess we'll start with, why would you even care about contributing to an open source project or open sourcing your work? I think one of the first things is, if you open source your work or work on an open source project, other people can take it and remix your work and readapt it. And that's really great because a lot of the work in civic tech is implementing one thing from one city in another city, and to stop reinventing the wheel every time. It'd be great if people started sharing more stuff. And then also, sometimes people think of open source as kind of like altruism, like I'm open sourcing my code and then other people can use it and other people can benefit from it. But I don't think that's 100% like the flow of, I guess, all the good work that you're doing, because there are self-interested reasons to open source your work as well. So we open source all of our work and we benefit tremendously from it just because other people are able to contribute. And then another thing is, I think when you open source your work, I guess I'll just put this down. Another great thing about open sourcing your work is it kind of changes your relationship to it and how you view it. Like, you're much less likely to view it as like it's a phase and I'm like going towards completion and I'm like rushing towards perfection, and more towards sharing what you're doing continuously. So everyone that you're collaborating with can see the status of everything the whole time. And that's really great for our workflow. And so I wanted to run this workshop because those are all really great reasons to have open source projects. But in reality, it's really confusing. If you're new to code, you can go on a GitHub page and it's like, oh my God, there's so much stuff. How does this make any sense? And I'd really love for more people who are not developers to get involved in open source projects, because there are a lot of things to do that aren't just writing code. So a lot of this talk is going to be focused on GitHub, because that's where a lot of developers put their open source projects. How many of you have a GitHub account? How many of you don't have a GitHub account? Okay, cool, this is great. It's like a half and half mix. Is there anything in particular that you all want to hear about? Anything that you find confusing? Maybe I can cover it later. Nope.
I wondered a little bit about intellectual property.
Intellectual property?
In that situation.
Okay.
It's not a big concern.
Okay. Anything else? Has anyone tried to contribute to an open source project and gotten really confused? Nope. Okay.
So I want to understand more sort of the pull requests and like doing it, like, and you know, if you do something and then you, like, did it wrong and take it back, and how does it, because it's all sort of, right, everything's marked, and so yeah, I think that's sort of some of my trepidation.
Yeah, totally. So that might be a little bit more detail than I'm getting in today, but I mean, I'd be happy to talk to you after about that. Alrighty. So here's a GitHub page. I figured that this talk, I'll make it more about tangible examples instead of just talking about open source. So throughout this entire workshop, I'll bring up actual examples of projects and things that happen on open source projects, so you can get a sense of what it looks like. So here's an example organization page on GitHub. You can have organizations and you can have people. And on a page you can see, this is a, oops. You can see that up here is the name of the organization, a little description, and then each one of these is a repo or a repository. And that's just a fancy word for project. And I really want to reiterate that open source projects don't have to be like this big, heavy thing. So a lot of times people can think of open source projects as something like a big software project that runs through years and years, and there are like 200 people working on it. And that's not always the case. On GitHub, a lot of the projects, they aren't apps per se. And I think it's really great to have lots of small things on GitHub and out in the open. So here are a couple examples of small things that you can put on GitHub as maybe your first open source project if you're open sourcing something. One example I really love is the Code for America project ideas repo. And this repository has no code whatsoever. It's just everyone throwing out ideas for prototypes, for tools, for connections to make between organizations. So it's really great for just getting a bunch of people to talk to each other. So you can see one of them is the CalFresh experience. Another one is, if you want to make government forms better. You can also just publish data sets on GitHub. You don't even have to write any code to do anything with it. It's a great way to publish data sets because it'll maintain versions and you can see when it changes, you can subscribe to it, you can open up issues, you can ask questions. So that's another way you can use GitHub. This is Building Footprints that was released by the city of Chicago. And then you can also just put a simple website on GitHub. It doesn't have to be an app. This is an example of something we actually just launched today called Councilmatic. It's a tool that helps you figure out what's going on in city council, and we put together a little landing page for it that takes you to all the different apps. And that is on GitHub. You can also put your boring data cleaning code on GitHub. So this map over here is from a project that we worked on called $1 Million Blocks, where we took data on prison sentences in Illinois and mapped that to costs and put that on a map. But before we can even make this interactive map, we have to do all the stuff to clean the data and prepare it. So, I mean, you can see that there are 3 commits, meaning that this wasn't a very active repo. We just did some stuff and uploaded it, and now it's out in the open.
So what's commits mean?
Yes, I'm going to get to that. Great question. So a commit is kind of like a chunk of work. And it's the unit of version control. So every single commit is really like a different version of your project. It's like moving forward. And yeah, so as I was saying before, open source projects involve a lot more than code. You can contribute to it without being a developer. And here are a lot of the things that take place. You can have a lot of discussion, you can talk about ideas, you can report bugs, be like, this thing doesn't work. You can suggest new things to add to a tool or a website. You can organize tasks. GitHub is essentially like a project management tool in addition to storing all your code. And also documentation is a really important thing. So I'll go over how to read a repo because when you go to GitHub, this can be kind of confusing. So you're faced with all of this crap everywhere. So the most important thing is just what repo you're looking at. So up here you can see there's an organization, which is DataMade, and then a project, which is NYC Councilmatic. And the organization is who owns this project. These are also all links on GitHub, so if you want to see all of DataMade's projects, you can click that and you'll see a list of all the projects. Another thing that's useful is this little description section below the project name. You can write a short blurb about what this project is and also include a URL if it has a website for people to go to. And I also like to add emoji onto all our descriptions, so there are some eyeballs there. And here are some buttons, not super clear, of what you can do. So watching a repo is kind of like subscribing to it. So when things happen, you can get email updates. When people open up issues, you can get email updates. That's more of a button for like things that you really care about, things that you might be collaborating on. And then star is kind of like favoriting or bookmarking, like, oh, this is interesting, maybe I'll check it out later. And then fork is, what's really cool, is you can take any piece of code and put it under your own GitHub account. And so you can think of fork as kind of like a save as, like just take everything as is, but save it as my own project. And then also next to these buttons, you can see how many other people have done these things, and that's often a measure of like how popular something is. Like this is something we just launched, so like not many people are interested in it yet on GitHub. But I mean, some projects you'll see like, oh, like 8,000 people have started this, and it's probably a really big project. Another thing that's handy is GitHub has like a little bar over here, and if you click it, it'll show you a language breakdown. And that's not always particularly accurate, but it will give you a sense of what this involves. Like you can see like, oh, this is Python and not Ruby. But often it'll be a little distorted, things like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, just because a lot of times people include libraries or have a lot of templates, and it's not really code that they wrote, but they're included in the repository, so it might inflate that. And then a nifty thing for if you want to get a sense of like what's going on recently in this repository, you can click on Pulse on the right. And so this kind of shows you what's been happening over the past week. So you can see that the date is September 23rd to 30th. And you can see that we've been very actively trying to scramble to finish up this website to launch it today. These are issues that we closed that I'll go over later. You can see who's working on it, about how much activity. There's a natural language summary over here. And then if you want a higher level overview of the project, you can click on graphs. And I think graphs is nifty because it can give you a sense of, is this a project that's actively being worked on right now? Or is this something that somebody made like 5 years ago and then dropped and has like never touched again? So yeah, you can clearly see that we have been scrambling up until now. And then another really nifty thing on GitHub repositories is a thing called a README. So a cool thing about GitHub is if you have a file called readme.md, they'll display it on your project homepage. And that's a really nifty place for people to document things. That's usually where people will say what this project is, how you use it, how you report errors, who to contact, who worked on this, things like that. So this is an example of one of the Python libraries that we have, and it says what it does, what it doesn't do, and usually they're like very long, and you can scroll down and know all about how to set this thing up on your computer. And then up here are the actual files. So I remember the first time I looked at a GitHub repository, I was like really overwhelmed because I was like, whoa, that's like a bazillion files and a bazillion directories. And just know to not get overwhelmed by that, because a lot of web frameworks will just come with a lot of directories. It's not like people individually made each one of these. And then it's really unfortunate that issues is so small on a GitHub page, because that's probably the thing that I check out the most. So issues is a really great feature of GitHub because it's essentially a project management tool. You can say, these are the things that I want to get done. And yeah, issues aren't always negative things. It can be something you want to add, or it can be a question. And so this is an example of what some real world issues can look like. For example, one of these is a little bug, and we labeled it as a bug. Some of them are enhancements, and you can do a lot of organizing on issues. And you can see some of them will have like a little avatar here. You can also assign people to work. So it's really for project management. And you can see which ones are open and which ones are closed. So open issues is things that are unresolved yet, and closed issues are things that have already been resolved. And then pull requests. So this is how you contribute code. And I remember I was pretty confused by pull requests at first, just by the name. So what a pull request is, it's a request for someone else to pull in your code to their repo. So that's an overview of what GitHub looks like. And now I'll go over some concepts, some GitHub basic concepts that would be helpful to know before I dive into ways that you can engage. So one thing that's really important to GitHub is version control. I'm sure we've all seen something like this, where you're maybe collaborating with someone else and you're like emailing back and forth and you have 1,000 versions of the same file. And it's really terrible because it's hard to see the differences between these files. It's hard to see, this is what Mary added, and there isn't a clear relationship between the files of like this one came before this other file. It's really easy to get confused. So Git kind of solves all of that. So one thing that people often get confused by is the distinction between Git and GitHub. So GitHub is a website that I was just showing you. It's like a place for Git projects. And Git at its core is really a software. It's a version control software. So what Git allows you to do is it allows you to make commits. So you can think of a commit as like a save. So at any point in time, you're like doing some work and it's like, oh, okay, that's a good chunk of work. I'm gonna stop there and commit this. So you can think of every commit as like a checkpoint. And at its core, every commit is made up of a difference of two files. And and by the way, Git is just for files. It's like not necessarily just for code. It's just for any text. So like you can edit text on GitHub. And then GitHub is just the cloud website that hosts all these projects. And then one thing that you can do that's helpful is forking a project. So that's saving as. So if I have a project and another city wants to implement it, say somebody wants to take this Councilmatic app that we just launched and bring it to their own city, they can fork it and then they'll have their own version of the code. And then a pull request is if you've already forked it and you made a bunch of contributions and you're like, Kathy would probably appreciate these contributions. You can lump up all of your changes together into a pull request and then send it back to me. And then README, I already went over. Oh, another thing to know about READMEs is that they use a language called Markdown, which just allows you to have like bold text, italic text, headers in a really easy way. That's easier than like writing HTML. All right, so now I'm going to go over some ways for people to contribute to open source projects that are not code-centric. So one thing you can do is you can find bugs and you can report them. So a bug doesn't have to be like a serious grave error. It can just be anything that you got confused by, or if you clicked a button and something that you expected to happen didn't happen. It's just any time a website just deviates from your expectations. So like you don't have to think about filing bugs and like, oh, filing a big issue ticket or something. It's just any little thing you can note it. So for example, here, David, who was our partner in working on Councilmatic, he was like, oh, I found that some events give an error page, and that's a bug because that shouldn't happen. And then you can also see, the great thing about GitHub issues is that each one is like its own mini forum. So you can see the status of the issue. There's a number that you can refer to it by. You can see all the activity. So David first commented and said, oh, this is a bug, something is wrong. And then you can label it, and then you can see when the issue was closed. Another thing that you can do that's really nifty is to offer to help out with user testing. This is something that a lot of developers would love to have user testing, but it's often an afterthought. So if somebody has a website or an app, especially a lot of the brigades, I think, have projects that I'm sure would appreciate user testing. You can open up an issue and be like, hey, here's some feedback I have. You can suggest features, things that you want to add to the site. So for example, on Councilmatic, our city council tool, David was like, hey, how about on this members page, let's add this other information. And another thing you can do is just have some general discussion. So here we were wondering about, hey, where do we get some additional data? And then David is able to engage and tell us that he'll reach out to his contacts. And I think this is one of the #1 reasons why open source projects should involve more than just developers, because some of the most interesting projects I've worked on are where there are people who didn't start out from a technical background and are able to come in and advise and answer questions and ask questions. And then another thing that developers would super appreciate is if you organize issues. So as I was saying, this is a pretty robust project management tool. So you can say like, oh, this thing is a bug. These things are enhancements. This one's a question. And that makes it really easy to filter through all the things that you have to do. And you can add labels by going to this little label pane, and you can see all the different labels that you can add to an issue. And you can also add your own custom labels. Another thing that's nifty that you can do with the issue tracker is you can help prioritize. So a milestone is kind of like a chunk of stuff that you want to get done. So what happens with a lot of open source projects is it will get to like bazillions of issues, like 50 issues open, and it's really hard to, it's like a little overwhelming to look at it and be like, oh, which are the things I should work on first? What are the most important? And this is a great project management tool, and you can say like, okay, these are all the things I want to achieve by the Code for America Summit, and then lump them all into one issue. And then you can see like, oh, how many things are involved and how far have we gotten? And then another great thing is to think a little more high level about how you can adapt and reuse a project. So an example here is a site I worked on called Expungio. If you were at the summit last year, I talked about it. What it is it's a website that will help you figure out if you're eligible for expungement, which is erasing your criminal record or juvenile record. And it'll connect you to legal aid in Chicago. And someone else in Maryland was like, oh, I think I could use this tool for Maryland. And I'm super, super proud of this because this person who made Expunge Maryland, Jason Tashi, he had never touched code before. He was an attorney. He had like never seen GitHub. And he was able to figure out how to fork my project and redeploy it. So it looks different. There's some different text, there's different styling, but there's still buttons, and you can use the same logic to determine eligibility and use kind of the same templates. So that's been really cool, and it'd be really helpful in general for people who maintain open source projects, for people to be making connections. If you're looking at a project and you think like, oh, this could be really helpful for this other organization that's trying to do the same thing, you can mention people on GitHub. You can tell people to like, oh, reach out to this person or this organization. And then another thing that would be a great way to contribute is just to contribute to documentation. So I think documentation for a lot of open source projects is really, really poor. And it's really unfortunate because documentation is usually the thing that keeps a project from getting reused. Like no matter how good your code is, no matter like how well you solve this problem, if other people don't even know what problem you're trying to solve, they can't really use your code. So some high level things that you can help document. By the way, if you want to edit documentation, you can just edit the README on someone else's GitHub project and then submit a pull request for them to pull in those changes. So these are pieces of information that often live in a README. So first, one thing that is surprisingly always lacking from projects is just, what is this? Is this a website? Is this a data tool? Who's it for? And also what problem it solves. Actually, it would be super helpful if you all just go on some GitHub projects and try to figure out what problem it solves. And if you can't figure out what it's for, just open up an issue for it. What the goal is, and another thing that's really nifty is what state it's in. Whether something is just an idea but not something that's being worked on yet, whether it's something that's under active development, whether it's something that's launched and just kind of in development, like fixing up bugs and stuff, or whether it's something that's like really old and hasn't been touched. Another thing that's useful to help document is what the project needs. So if you have an explicit call for, oh, this project needs some design help, or we need to rework this about page, things like that, like general high-level things for what resources a project needs. This would be helpful for, say, brigades and volunteer organizations. And then a continuation of things to ensure other people have in their documentation is, how do I get this running? A really great thing that you could do is if you want to go to some open source projects and try to figure out how to run it on your laptop. Like if there's a data tool or if there's like a website, usually people will have some instructions on how to get it running, and most of the time they're like really incomplete and missing something. So if you want to really help with how reusable something is, it's like a huge help to just look over someone's instructions and verify that they work. Another thing you can document is how to adapt a project, like what are the things to change if you want to change something. Are there any settings that you need to tweak? And also, how do you contribute back? Another thing, I think this is like the lowest hanging fruit for documenting a project, is just stating what's not documented. If you just state like, oh, there are a bunch of instructions to set up this database, instead of like writing those instructions, to start with, you can just say like, this README is missing some instructions for how to set up a database. I think it's really important to just explicitly state things that are missing. And that would be a really easy, low-touch way to contribute to projects. Just add a note that's saying like, oh, this is missing an overview of what this is. This is missing like a description of the goals and the problem. And also giving credits. So I think in open source in general, it'd be great to ensure that you're acknowledging everyone that kind of touched the project. So whether you're building on top of someone else's tool, Or in the case of this Councilmatic app that we just launched, we were building it on top of another data standard, things like that. It's great to just say like all of the stuff that went into a project. And also I've tried to do a thing recently where if you have people help out with giving user feedback, like credit them too. Like they had really useful suggestions. Be generous with your credit. And that's it. And I also, if we have time, which we do, I had a hands-on exercise because it's not as fun to look at PowerPoint slides as it is to do stuff on your own laptops. So does everyone here have a laptop? Does anyone not have a laptop? Do you want to double up with people who have laptops? Does anyone have any additional questions? Was anything super confusing in that presentation? Yes?
Do people sort of trade work with one another? Like say, I was a user willing to do some product testing and then needed help with some development advice. Would I be able to, is there like any kind of functionality built in?
No, there isn't on GitHub, but that's totally the type of thing that would happen through like informal discussion. But yeah, totally. All right, so I'm gonna have you all fork a project and I'm gonna demonstrate a really cool feature on GitHub. So if you, okay, wait, first of all, if you don't have a GitHub account, you should go to github.com and make an account. I'll give you all some time to do that first. All right, does everyone who has a laptop have a GitHub account now? Okay, cool. So what I'm going to show you is a really cool feature of GitHub that I end up using a lot called GitHub Pages. So a lot of the times if you're writing some code for a website and you just want to put it online, it's kind of confusing to figure out how to do so. There are tools like Heroku where you can host stuff. You can get a server from Amazon, AWS, and put your stuff on there. But it's kind of circuitous and hard to just put a website online. And so one really great feature of GitHub is for your repos, they'll host a website for you. And how they do that is they put it in a branch. So you know how before I was saying that you can fork a website and it's kind of like saving as? Fork a repo and it's like saving as. So that's like a branching model in GitHub. It's kind of like here is where this thing starts and Mary took it and then Kathy took it and then these people kind of have two versions of this thing. But you can also do save as within your own project. So you can think of a branch as a save as of your repo that's still within your own project. So you create a branch, but it's all still yours, and it's just another copy of the project. And so the cool thing about GitHub is if you name a branch gh/pages, it'll know that that's something that you want to host, and it'll automatically host a website for you. So here is what this looks like. And also a lot of people do this not necessarily as a website on its own, but if people want to make a website for their project, they can have the code for their project and all their other branches. The default branch is usually called master, and then have a website for their project in the GitHub Pages branch. So this is what the website looks like. So here's the code for the website. You can see there's an index.html. That's what tells you all the content that's on this page. There's CSS, which is styling it. There's a README that I really should populate. So you can see that the URL is Kathy Dang, my GitHub username, .github.io. So now I want you from your GitHub account to fork this. So click this little fork button over here. It's github.com/kathydeng, CATHYDENG/simple-website-template. Is anyone not there? All right, did everyone fork it? Who has a laptop? Okay, so once you fork it, this will show up in your own repository. So it should have taken you to a page where it's your username and then /simple website template. Do you all see that? Okay, cool. So now you have a copy of all of my code, even though it's like 3 files. And now I want you to navigate to your username.github.io/simple website template. Did it work? Your username.github.io/the repo name, so simple-website-template. No. Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, maybe bump up the size of the text on that page too.
How do I?
Apple
Yeah.
plus, control plus, or command plus.
Ah, here we go. Oh wait, but that's just it. Let me see.
Yeah, I think there's also usually some delay before.
Yeah, it'll take some time for it to recognize, probably.
More than a minute.
Yeah, so we can wait a little bit.
So name.io/.
Yeah, so let me bump this up. So it's your username, which is here, .github.io/this. Yeah?
Can I ask you someone unrelated question?
Yeah, sure.
Do you know, by chance, if certain wireframing and prototyping tools can be hosted, like the ugly HTML those spit out?
Yeah. So if it's HTML, then yes. If you put HTML onto GitHub, as long as you put it in index.html, index.html is the file that GitHub will look for to render this. But I mean, in general, you can put any kind of file on GitHub. It's just whether or not they'll show it in a pretty way. So if you upload an image, GitHub will recognize like, oh, this is an image, and then if you click on the file, it'll display the image. Or if you, a really cool thing is if you upload some GeoJSON, I think GitHub will also like render what it looks like. So GitHub will recognize like certain file formats, but if you have like some fancy special file that GitHub doesn't recognize, you can still upload it. GitHub just won't know how to, like it'll have the file name here, and just if you click on it, it'll just be like a gray screen. But you can still host any kind of file on here. All right, has the website worked? Nope. Okay. Well, that's too bad. But later on, you'll have your own website. And the thing that you can do is you can go and edit the code in index.html and adapt this website to anything you want. So if you want to make this into a personal website, you can change the text up here from simple website template to your name's website. So that's a thing that you can do. You can adapt projects, and if you want to contribute back to me, like for example, if you're like, oh, well, it's super confusing that these changes don't happen automatically and you should like add this to your instructions, you can make those changes in the templates. Let's see, you can say like, you get a copy of this website and like wait a couple minutes. You can add that to the instructions, and once you do that, you can open a pull request, which is submit the code back to me, and I can merge it, which is kind of like saying like, I'm taking in this pull request, I accept these changes, and then like it'll change my website. All right.
To make a pull request, you'd first fork it, and then you're working on it in your own user account, and then you issue, and then you make the pull request from there.
Yeah. So GitHub, the website, is pretty smart about pull requests. So if you recently made some changes, and if you like recently made some commits, updated something, GitHub will show you a little banner that's like open a pull request. So it'll give you the option to do that. Otherwise, what you can do is you can go to my website and my repo page, and you can click the button that says pull requests, and GitHub will be smart about figuring out what you're trying to contribute. Like if you forked my project, GitHub will be smart and recognize that you're probably trying to contribute the changes that you recently made back to me. Any other questions?
Wait, after you fork your project,
Uh-huh.
then you
Oh, yeah. So the way that GitHub Pages works is it will do your username.github.io / the name of the repo. So if you just do your username.github.io, let me just type it here. Just open it in a browser. People see that? That's the URL that you want to go to. Has the website showed up for anyone? Well, you should check again later and then tell me about it, and then contribute a pull request updating these instructions. All right, yeah, so I think we're all set. If any of you have like more specific questions and you want to come up and ask something really detailed about merge conflicts and stuff, I'm also happy to talk about that. But yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.